Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pasta Jardula with Johnny Tsunami on the ones and two. And good morning. I know it's an unusual time for us, but we had to get in and talk about something really important that's been going on in the news cycle lately. I have Treasurer Santucci, our lawyer, who's usually here talking about Epstein, but today he's going to talk about something that's in his wheelhouse. How you doing today, Michael?
Hey, Pasta, how you doing?
Good, Michael, but I'm a little perturbed because there's a lot of things going on when it comes to three areas in which you're an expert on. Number one being freedom of speech, number two being public domain, and number three, I also want to cite the fair use doctrine because what's going on online today in social media, there's a lot of gray areas. There have been shows like mine who've been getting strikes, who've been kind of getting little slaps on the hands, and we need to kind of explain what's going on, unpack it lightly, and continue this dialogue and this talk because it really is an interesting era right now. Way everything's taken off online, correct? So,
Yes, and shows like yours, are like integral to our democracy. So when we're talking about freedom of speech, when it relates to political speech, it's almost sacred under our Constitution. Without it, we cannot have a functioning democracy. So I will fight like hell for shows like yours, and shows like yours need to hear this discussion that we're having today. So. Because there
so
are guidelines to stay within, so to make sure you can continue to do what you're doing. So.
well, we're very thankful that we have like counselors like you out there, lawyers out like you out there, helping us out on this situation because people are lost and the debate is going on. Let's start with freedom of speech because you talked about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, you can't just say anything. You can't incite violence. You can't yell fire in a building when there's no fire. What is actually, how does our freedom of speech fit into this this whole arena in which we're talking about?
Mhm. Well, the basis of it is the First Amendment to our United States Constitution, which is also considered the Bill of Rights. And it's our very first amendment to the Constitution. That's how important it was to our founders. It includes freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And when you're talking about copyright law or use of content or copyrightable content, whether it be a TV show, a radio broadcast, an audio file, a song, there are freedom of speech considerations built into the law that governs those activities. It's built into the federal statutes, into the Copyright Act at Title 17 of the United States Code, and it's also built into the case law of our various federal circuit courts all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. So freedom of speech weaves its way into these decisions about how copyright law should be administered and followed and enforced.
I think the copyright law, when it comes to our arena, is where we get into those little gray areas and whatnot. In your experience right now, dealing with a lot of these cases, where do you see our freedom of speech being infringed upon, and where and why? In other words,
Mhm. Well, this is somewhat of a unique argument, and you and I are eye to eye on this issue. To use the example of the Democratic debates recently, there are networks, big media that own that content. So at a base level of copyright law, if you produce or create content, whether it be TV, audio, again, you own it. You're the copyright owner. But it seems kind of an aberration of the intent of our founders to say that something so important as a major party presidential debate going into an election, that one company owns it. Yes, CNN, for example, and the first one was MSNBC. They produced the debate, they organized it, they paid for it, but it was sanctioned by one of our two major parties. Like it or not, we're a two-party system. And that's a sanctioned debate by a major party for a presidential election. So to say one company has a monopoly on that content is very unfair. Now, I'd like to see debates be completely within the public domain, no matter who produces them. The counter argument will be, well, what is the public domain? Public domain it means it's free to use. If a song, Yankee Doodle, copyright is expired on that. It's over 100 years old. It's in the public domain for everybody to use that song. But something brand new like a debate is not in the public domain. Politically, we both agree that it should be. So our backup argument on that, and this is where streaming companies and shows like yours and online and any kind of independent media needs to know, your savior is in the fair use doctrine of the Copyright Act. It's right in the Copyright Act, and there's plenty of case law on it and Supreme Court opinions on it, where you can use someone's copyrightable content if it qualifies as a fair use. Now, what is a fair use? That's what you go to a lawyer for. But there's plenty of information online. There's information on our website, 500law.com. And we could discuss some of those fair use factors today when we get to that part of our discussions.
Yeah, I mean, you said something right off the bat. The term public domain, which I'm going to read, refers to creative materials that are not protected by intellectual property laws such as copyright, trademark, and patent laws. The public owns these works, not an individual author or artist. Anyone can use the public domain work without obtaining permission, but no one could ever own it. What is the argument that political information, like those Democratic debates, like a Democratic conversation on CNN or MSNBC, what is the argument where public domain comes into factor?
Currently, it's not public domain if it was created by a private company like CNN or NBC. So it's not. I'm making a public policy argument, as are you, that it should be public domain when it's a sanctioned national election, like a presidential debate, where we're going to choose who is in essence the leader of the free world, or at the very least the leader of the United States. There should be more expanded fair use of that, right up to the point where we might want to say it's in the public domain. Now, the counter argument to that, copyright owners, one of the purposes of the Copyright Act is to encourage creativity, encourage innovation. So the government gives a creator, a creative person, creative company, a monopoly of ownership on that content for a certain period of time. For patents, it's about 20 years. For trademarks, it's for as long as you use it and don't abandon it. For copyright, it's the life of the author plus a bunch of years. For corporations, it's like a century. So you get the incentive of that. So if everything like this is going to be in the public domain, the counter argument is, what is the incentive for anybody to organize these debates? So we're going to have far less debates because there's less money in it. There's less profit in it. There's less commercials you can run from oil companies during the debate. That may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. I don't know. Some people say we have too many debates. Some people say we have too many candidates on the stage during the debates, but some people say the more the merrier. So, there was a time where debates were on the street with somebody standing on a soapbox.
Yeah. Hey, Kennedy and Nixon got into a bus. Kennedy and Nixon got into a bus and drove around the country going to debate. You know what I'm saying? Debates are essential. Debates are important. I think when you're talking about publicly funded elections, you take all that extra red meat out of there, that extra money that's going in there, and you just have set debates, public domain. Everybody has a right to it. I think more debate, the better. But I think the argument is anytime you see a lawmaker on a TV show, that should be the public domain. It's a lawmaker, stating its opinion, its fact, or where they want to go with the decision that can be made to affect all of us. Yeah. So I think the public domain issue is what is public domain is going to come up more and more. Yeah. And some of us who do this for a living, we think that almost everything should be public domain. There's nothing I do different on my show that any progressive show doesn't do. They do the same thing. They'll take an interview from somebody in politics, and they'll break that down pretty much. You know what I'm saying? And they'll talk about it and they'll discuss it. Some people are being suppressed, some people are not. And I think it's a big gray area. Let's get into
it. Paz, can I just say this also segues into something that all progressives are passionately believe in, and that's getting the money out of politics.
Yes.
Well, maybe we should get the money out of the debates also. Look at the commercials that are running on the debates. That's what's fueling these debates. Is it right for, a handful of media companies to have a monopoly on our presidential debates and to profit off them? These are issues that need to be fully and thoroughly discussed. So.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about these 20 years ago, they were public domain, these debates. Nowadays, CNN, when they're showing it, they're claiming the rights to it. We had to go through this whole process. They took our stream down. We had to get it back and write to them. But when we did write to them, we talked about the fair use doctrine. We cited the fair use doctrine. Why don't you explain, because that seems to be the saving grace in everything, is the fair use doctrine. And I don't think YouTube or Google are abiding by it. Can you break it down a little bit?
The overall concept of the fair use doctrine is right in its word. How much copyrighted material or content is it fair for a third party, a non-owner, to use? What's fair to use? So what the courts have to look to, and what media companies like Google have to look to, and Facebook, and are 4 factors as to whether or not a non-owner of the copyrighted content, for example, like the CONVO couch streaming parts of the debate, of the Democratic debate, what's fair for you to do and what's not fair. So we look at 4 factors. If you'd like me to walk through them quickly, I can.
Please do.
The first is the purpose and the character of the non-owner's use, of the user's use. So really here we're looking at whether or not this is a for-profit use or a not-for-profit use. Now, a very strong argument can be made that the CONVO couch is not turning a profit when it streams the debate. The purpose is informational, educational. The purpose is participation in our public discourse about something as important as who the DNC, who Democratic voters are going to choose to run against the Republicans. So the purpose and the character of the use. Then the nature of the copyrighted work. What is it? Is it something that is really content created for profit? For example, there's a difference between taking something that is part of our democracy, which smells more like public domain, than if you were to air a TV commercial by a company that you don't own. They're used to commercial, and now you're piggybacking on their profits. Whereas I would argue something like a debate is something that more belongs to the public. So the third factor is the amount and substantiality of the work as a whole. This gets right into an example that news shows and political shows like yourself, or even the mainstream use. You always see media outlets using little clips from a debate. You saw on Fox News them using little clips from CNN's debate. You ask, well, why can they do it and why can't we? Well, that's about the amount and substantiality of the use. How much of that debate are you using? Did you stream the whole thing start to finish with no breaks, no other content, no other commentary, no other visuals? If you do, it's smelling less like you're doing a fair use and you're really copying somebody else's content and drawing their viewers to you. Taking you into the final factor, the fourth factor is the effect on the market for the copyrighted work. So really what we're looking for there is, in the example of the CONVO couch versus CNN, is the CONVO couch using CNN's content in a way to act as a substitute for CNN? Are you trying to get mainstream media viewers that want to hear CNN's commentary, that want to watch the BP oil commercials that CNN is airing in between the breaks of the debates, or are you going after a totally different audience, a progressive audience that rejects mainstream media and its advertisers and wants to make decisions for themselves independently? So that's really that. Are you a substitute for CNN? Yeah. So that's what you're looking at in those situations. And I do a lot of this with music, mainly music. That's where this comes up a lot, with music sampling, in hip hop. I was litigating this stuff kind of as sampling technology started in the early stages of my career. And a lot of these fair use cases involve hip hop producers, and I've been involved in lawsuits against Timbaland, and I represented a lot of content owners and a lot of artists as well, and this stuff comes up in that context as well, not just TV and news.
You know what? The one thing I really can't stand, Michael, is that Google, YouTube, Facebook, they don't have to explain why they took you down. They don't have to talk about it, nor do they have to provide the guidelines. So when you were talking about number 4, why we were doing these things, we were definitely providing a new audience and whatnot, and, a different avenue. And we were also commentating with thumbs up, thumbs down, that whole thing. But the really disheartening part is that you don't even know. Just like Tulsi Gabbard said, she's suing Google for $50 million because she still hasn't even been told why, nor has she been given guidelines or parameters about what to do. So in other words, if you're telling me you have this debate, you have the copyright, but it is public domain, and I can only show it for a half hour at a time, a clip, then we would show it for 29 minutes, stop, take it down, go on again. We would abide by the guidelines if we only knew. Is there a reason why they don't explain the guidelines?
Yes. One is a practical reason and one is a selfish reason. Number one, companies like Google or anybody that runs what in the law is called a message board, like Facebook, third parties are posting. These companies don't want to be responsible for policing the content of millions of people's posts. They don't want to have to hire people to read every post and see if there's defamation, to see if there's terrorist threats, to see if there's copyright infringement. So they lobbied our government to create what's called an amendment to the Copyright Act called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It's also known as the DMCA. Congress acted, and they enacted the DMCA and gave some guidelines to help companies like Google and in how they're going to manage YouTube, and Facebook, how they're going to manage their platform. All they have to do, they don't have to monitor content. All they have to do is respond to takedown notices from alleged copyright owners, or respond to takedown notices from someone alleging defamation or alleging a trademark infringement, like a wrongful use of a logo. And they just have to follow very minimal, kind of easy to follow guidelines of takedowns. So they're very trigger happy with pulling people's content when they get a takedown notice. Because if they don't follow the guidelines of the DMCA, then they could be found liable. That's when you can find Google liable, if you can allege that they did not follow the DMCA procedures. So selfish reasons, again, they don't want to be responsible. Number two, the reason they don't give you the guidelines is we're talking about, in essence, art in a general sense, and the content is subjective. So, I could think of 1,000 different examples of how a song, you can use the song in ways that might be infringing, that might be fair use, or might not be. So again, they don't leave that to Google to determine. So all they have to do is just pull it down, and they don't have to tell you what you can do subjective, because art is so subjective. Television is subjective. Music is subjective. They're not required to tell you and give you legal advice on what you have to change to make it better. Now, if you can trigger a conversation with their legal department and get in their ears, you can have those sorts of specific conversations. The other things you can do is you can reach out to the content owner themselves who sent the takedown notice saying that you're infringing, and you could negotiate with them and saying, okay, for our next show, if we did this, this, or this, will you, stand down and not send another takedown notice? So you can work it out with them.
Yeah.
But it's a really harsh reality. In the first step, it's you send a takedown notice, and if it looks like, to Google, they're very cursory review and guidelines they have to follow, they just pull it. No explanations. All of a sudden, boom, you're shut off.
Yeah.
And then there are two things they allow you to do through them, which, as you know, that's how you guys get turned back on. So you follow their procedures. The other things you could do is you could file a lawsuit against the content owner for a wrongful takedown notice. You could even sue Google like Tulsi did.
Yeah.
Alleging that they're not following the DMCA, that they're infringing upon her freedom of speech.
Yeah, well,
they're biased toward progressives, and all the types of arguments that Tulsi's attorneys are making.
yeah, well, I think with the new data dump from one of the whistleblowers at Google, his name is Zach Voorhees, and he was actually on the Veritas project. If you want to go check it out, he dumped a lot of information. He even wrote an open letter to Tulsi Gabbard explaining how she got tripped, because I think with a lot of this new information coming out, they're just solidifying what we already knew. There is, in my personal opinion, a political bias from Google and YouTube, because there's two elements to it. Yes, the copyright infringement comes on. We contact CNN, they take it down. But now this channel that everybody's watching right now is not currently monetized, and we're trying to get monetized. So now we have to deal with YouTube, and they never tell you exactly why they are not monetizing you, or give you they give you this broad answer. Now, I thought a lot of times it's because also that they don't want to incriminate themselves. Because if they tell you exactly why, they're actually giving you weaponry to go after them, because they're incriminating themselves. Is that sort of sometimes why they don't tell you? Is that just my mind making up shit?
This is ridiculous, a ridiculous view from the point of view of a company like that. But from their point of view, this is an arm's length business negotiation between little guys like us and this huge media, content owner that owns a whole bunch of the content in the whole world and controls it. So it's not a fair negotiation. So they have so much power. If you concentrate that much power in the hands of one company, it's subject to abuse, and they're going to have very arbitrary procedures. One, because again, they're covering their own ass. But two, it costs them money to treat each situation differently and treat you special. So they kind of have blanket policies that are kind of crude when it comes to applying it to the average person or average independent media outlet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me say this, Michael, because we got to get out of here. But the tech companies, they're super predators, and they must be brought to heel. We're going to open up the conversation. We're going to talk more about this, but I think it was a great first show to kind of explain the freedom of speech, fair use doctrine, which everybody has to look into. People like me who are podcasters like myself, or news shows like us, and also what is in the public domain. I think it's a big question that needs to be answered. Really quick before we get out of here, have you heard anything about Donald Trump's executive order? Are you yay or nay on it, or you haven't got a chance to look into it?
Sorry, I've been working all day, focused on one project. So,
well, you should look into it, because I think we're going to have some discussions down the road, because some people, they want some type of action to take place. They don't want Silicon Valley deciding what's freedom of speech and what's in the public domain. However, there's people on the other side of the coin who are really nervous that if you get an executive order, you got guys like Ajit Pai.
Oh, sure. I am aware of that.
It's going to be a scary situation.
I mean, both sides of the political spectrum are arguing that Google is politically biased. The problem is they're so big, and they're susceptible to bias, and they just have so much power in their hands to make arbitrary or politically biased decisions one way or the other. And that's why some people are talking about breaking them up. Just like the banks might be too big.
Yeah.
So, that's where we are on that. So,
well, we'll talk more in the future, Michael. Thank you so much. I'm sure we're going to talk about some Epstein and some fun stuff down the road. For Pasta Jardula, Johnny Tsunami, and our own lawyer for the CONVO couch, Michael Santucci, CONVO out.
CONVO out.